Welcome to Rise from Lausanne, Switzerland, where stores are open, but restaurants are closed, where borders are open, but university campuses are closed. And let me tell you, teaching online is no fun at all. I am Professor Demian Hodari of EHL Lausanne.
And from lovely, though I'm sad to say, lockdown London, where it's beautiful outside, but I can't go outside. It's Anita Mendiratta, thrilled to join the Grouch, clearly having a very bad week so far, and it's only Monday. And we're really thrilled to have you with us all. We're on to episode 22, and I did a count. We are 203 days since we started doing Rise. Who would have thought? We live in a world that is changing on an ongoing basis, and I must say these past 2 weeks have been historic in an already historic year. Rapid enforcement of lockdowns, partial lockdowns, and states of emergency are taking place in the Northern Hemisphere. We've got leaders around the world being in the spotlight. There's a race for not just vaccines, but also quick testing taking place. And as we all know, deafening levels of news and media that's coming through, which is why Rise is important. We promised you we would separate the news from the noise, and every single week, we are thrilled that you join us. As you join us today, as always, please do send through your questions. We are here for you, and we look forward to hearing your thoughts as we go through today's episode. So, Professor Hodari, let's do this. Over to you, sir.
All right, today's theme, Consultant Wanted. We struggled a little bit on the title, I will tell you that. But we didn't struggle on the idea for this show, and that is, we've heard from a lot of our audience, and also I've heard from students, and obviously Anita from people that she knows, that a lot of people are considering going into consulting or are trying to go into consulting during this period. Maybe they've lost their position or have closed their business, and they've got all this expertise and think that they can share it and may well be able to do so. But the world of consultancy has changed for sure over the last 6 months. So we bringing in two experts from this area to help us understand how things have changed and what that means for people that are in the business or want to join consultancy. But before we bring them on, we've got some interesting things for you as always. And we start off with our first poll for you today. So if we could get that poll up, please. All right, Anita. Managing moods. As you said, I may be a little bit extra grouchy today. I will try to manage that. But you can see, 50% finding alternative wellness activities, quite a few people managing expectations. Everybody seems to have found something from our list and multiple. And I think, again, goes to show a little bit that everybody's facing this in slightly different ways. But this moods and wellness activities, hopefully people are more at ease this time around.
That's such an interesting one. And I must say, as always, thank you to all our viewers, because your points of view are really interesting. It says a lot about, admittedly, what we experienced here. There's less shock, there's more preparation, and clearly there's more mental preparation for what lockdown means. It's been a bizarre blur of a year, but this is really interesting how people are getting stronger in their own personal coping mechanisms, starting with their emotions. That's very, very rich. So, which takes us to, where in the world are we? This is what is really fascinating about where we are in the world right now. Admittedly, when I was writing my script a few days ago, and yes, Professor Hodari, I'm one of those annoying kids that does their homework early, I started doing the narrative, and yet even since then, it's been incredible. The narrative I want to start with, though, is a look at ultimately what's defining our year. It's COVID-19. And what's quite sad to see is that in the Northern Hemisphere, we are in a situation which is just shocking. We see already lockdowns, full lockdowns in the UK, France, Germany, and Greece, partial lockdowns in terms of Ireland and the Netherlands, state of emergency, even just that language is so dramatic, taking place in Spain. Europe itself is going through it. I know in Switzerland, you've had some really dramatic changes. But what is more shocking about what's taking place is the speed of the lockdowns. They're happening so quickly that people are getting quite alarmed about going away from home. And yet we see as we go further east, Japan, North Korea, South Korea, New Zealand, Australia, they've actually been able to hold back in terms of the contagion and the fears around COVID-19. Very, very interesting to see. But clearly, as we go into flu season, as we start to get a sense of a vaccine is coming, not everyone wants to take it. Rapid testing is happening. Not everyone wants to get on the plane because they want to be close to home. We still live in a profoundly uncertain world. What did you find, sir?
I found a lot. Here, according to this chart right from Oxford University, we've looked at them a bunch of times over the past 200 days and the research they do. And as you can watch now, keep your eyes on the colors changing, right? And as we moved along in time, you can see here we're in April, going into May. These are full lockdown border controls, border closures, the darker the color. But you start to see as we get into the summer months, back in July and August, especially looking at Europe and the US, lightening up, reducing the number of closures, allowing some international travel. What I think is most interesting is look here at October, right? Very light colored, a lot of international travel allowed. So even though, and as I mentioned before, borders open in Switzerland, even as the virus has raged across much of the world, and even as we're going into additional lockdowns, that full closure of borders doesn't seem to be as in effect as it was before. And I'm not sure if this is because countries are recognizing the importance of travel and tourism to their economies, or recognizing that people just aren't going to travel anyways, or recognizing that travel is not causing as much of the problem as we thought. So I think it's interesting for our industry to see that there is some positive notes here in terms of people's ability to travel if necessary.
Indeed. Demian, if I can just jump in there, because it's a really interesting one. And I was on a call with the South African government this morning. Exactly to your point, borders might be open, but it's also about source markets. And are they actually wishing to travel? So Southern Hemisphere going into summer. And again, if we look at South Africa, which is very much in a, we want you back. Their source markets, UK, Germany, Netherlands, the US, they're not wanting to travel out. So it's such an interesting relationship of not just the demand side and the supply side individually, but how those two dance together to keep the industry going.
Agreed. Yeah, and I think it's a complex issue. And if you look here, this is from our friends at STR. This came out just a few days ago. Looking again at hotel performance in Europe since February of this year. And what I think is the two things I want people to look at is not just the flat bottom lines there in the spring that we all know about, but again, the increase in occupancy during the summer as people did travel. And we were reaching now 50%, some places 40%. It's not a very great number, but it is double or triple what it was at the height of the lockdown in the spring. But also look at the trend over the last 2 months, right? September, October, we are on that downward sloping occupancy levels, not only as there's been more infections and now more lockdowns, but also what I think is interesting is that nobody said in those summer months, oh, we are coming out of this crisis. Things are looking better. It's going to continue. Everybody knew this was coming, and that was a small blip. And hotels and restaurants, et cetera, that were able to capitalize on that, generate some revenue, keep people employed, great. But everybody knew this downward trend was coming. And I don't think we've seen the bottom of that. And I wouldn't be surprised if in the next month or two, we're back at April levels of occupancy down in those teens or 20%.
Goodness me, it'll be good to hold up that glass of champagne on New Year's Eve, Demian.
Or the bottle in your case.
Exactly. I was told to respect COVID-19 bubbles, so I'm respecting COVID-19 bubbles. And if we look at respect, very interesting to see. I thought I'd throw this in because this is the Dow Industrials, and these are the top 30 companies in the US. It's from the A to Z of companies, and it goes American Express, Apple, Boeing, all the way down to Walt Disney and Company. I showed this because this was a graph that was put out based on how the markets respond to elections. And when the incumbent wins versus the incumbent loses. The incumbent losing would be ultimately the top blue dark line, and the incumbent winning would very much be the bottom line, the yellow being this year of COVID-19. I share this for one primary reason, because ultimately the stock markets, financial liquidity has a direct response on travel and tourism. Why? Because it has a direct reaction in terms of people's job security, disposable income, and spending confidence in the future. So we always keep an eye on whether it's the Dow Industrials, the NASDAQ, whatever it might be anywhere in the world, those indices are critical because they are a direct reflection of the confidence or lack of confidence of people putting money into travel. I thought this was really interesting to see. So please God, we find that next year people are much more confident that we have the right leaders in place, the right vaccine in place, the right testing systems in place, and the right hope for the recovery of our industry, which we know is essential because we need it for 1 in 10 jobs in the world. I thought this was really interesting to see.
Yeah, this would have been really interesting had there been an election recently. This would have been even more interesting.
Indeed. So, and we move on. 30-second challenge. Sir, I'm going to give it to you first to begin.
All right. So, Anita, you mentioned before 200 days into Rise, and from the beginning we were saying, let's make sure people don't waste these 100 days, right? We assumed there'd be 100 days of lockdown, and we didn't really know when things would end, and that was one of our missions, right? To help people take advantage and have a story to tell when they finish those 100 days. It's now been 200 days. We're probably looking at another 100 days at least. So we asked before how people were managing this, and I'm curious, from your work with clients, what are you seeing business-wise, the way businesses are handling this phase different from the first 100 days?
It's a great question that you ask, and I must say that I'm blessed and saddened at the same time that my business has never been busier. And it answers your question from the point of view of leaders are much more comfortable and confident in expressing, I don't know what to do, because they're much more honest about the need for finding solutions beyond themselves. I think that's really important. And I think that's been a fundamental shift this year, where, as we've said on Rise from the beginning, we either all win or we all lose. And that matters at a family level, at a small business level, at a large business level, at a government level. And the level of intimacy and honesty that I've seen in the last 100 days compared to beginning shows that people recognize the human resource is vital. And that's not just the intellectual strength, but the emotional strength. So my question to you, sir, I've loved every single day that I've spent with you on Rise. Oh. What shame.
I'm gonna blush.
I might get you crying after all, 213 days in. Why are you a better professor because of this year?
Oh, I don't know if I am. I guess I've learned new skills, right? Learning how, hopefully, to engage students in an online format. And I think some of that has improved the in-person. When we were teaching in person, we're back online now. And so also, whenever you have a class that goes well, you may fall into a rut and not update as much. And I don't think that's necessarily been my case, but this has led me to relook at a course substantially with Sarah and revamp quite a bit of it. And I think it's made some improvements for the course, whether it's online or in person. So I think taking advantage and feeling the need to evolve, probably.
It's a great.
We'll see what I don't know if the students agree, but we'll see at the end of the year on my performance reviews.
Oh, if that was ever an invitation for our viewers to write in right now.
They need an official link, but we can get it to them if they want.
Thank you for the honest answer.
Sure.
Okay. Headlines.
All right, we got a couple of headlines for you. My first headline, which I thought was pretty important, was this travel goes members only. And I liked it for a couple of reasons. One, it talked a little bit about the fact that there was already a movement in the industry and the luxury scale for members only, not only clubs, but also resort associations, home sharing networks only with ultra luxury houses and costing many thousands of dollars. But we're starting to see this idea spread a little bit, not only from luxury, but we're starting to see it spread into lower levels of the spectrum as well, where people want to know who they're going to be around. They want someone to take care of everything for them. Even if it's not luxury, I want to know that that place has been cleaned, that you know who the cleaning company is, that you know who owns the house that I'm renting, that you know the area that it's in. People are a little bit more hesitant to take a risk with some of these choices. And the fact that a lot of these places are operating in less dense areas, which of course people are seeking out. So again, it's one of these trends that has been taking place before the pandemic, accelerated because of it. And I think it might be something that lasts Last week we talked about subscription-based hospitality. Now we're talking about members-only clubs and associations taking off. So let's see if that carries on going forward.
And it also links to Airbnb and home sharing growth, where people want to know the hosts rather than just generic going to a place and not knowing who's taking care of it.
Yeah,
Great
exactly.
piece.
And the second one was a bit more positive as well. Inspire brands to buy Dunkin' for $11.3 billion. Part of that is debt and part cash. A couple of things here. One, Dunkin', which is not just Dunkin', just be Dunkin' Donuts, but also Baskin Robbins. There's about 20,000 units between the two of them, 100% franchised in the US. Their stock had already doubled since March. So again, pandemic proof, if you want, right? People still want to indulge in these fast foods. The franchise model, quick service, that has withstood and actually done extremely well during this crisis. And I do think it's another sign that investors are finding opportunities in the marketplace. There's a couple 100,000 people that work for this company that are on solid footing because of demand for their products. And I just think it's another sign of, as bad as things are, there are opportunities out there. There are certain parts of the industry that have found ways to succeed. And it's just nice to see not everybody's sitting back. And again, this is a pretty big group, a pretty big private equity group taking this company private. And I think you'll see more of this, not only in this sector, but in the hotel sector, these mergers and acquisitions and consolidation over the next few months.
That's a great one. And it's interesting. It's all levels. It's not just, as you say, just one specific segment itself. So my two.
Okay.
The first one, sad Mickey.
Oh.
The reason I shared this is that at the beginning of Rise, we talked very, very, very openly about my fear, which was the why bother. So much of the travel experience is tactile, it's emotional. And we saw, and I showed a piece in one of my headlines where we have this beautiful little girl at Walt Disney World, I think it was in Shanghai. They'd opened up again and she had her little mask on, but she's carrying her Minnie Mouse. This made me sad, only because it's not just an announcement of 11,000 job losses across a place that should be magic, but it's the line at the bottom. Walt Disney World also laid off 720 actors and singers last week. Walt Disneyland is not about the rides. It's about the magic, and the magic comes through performance. And this just made me really sad, because for those little people and the occasional grouch who goes there looking to see Cinderella and looking to hear It's a Small World being sung by all the performers, taking that human dimension out takes the magic out. And it just made me really sad. And yes, I'm sorry, I am a Disney follower and I love Walt Disney. But I thought this was an interesting reflection of the hard infrastructure might remain, but it's the soft infrastructure that's the heartbeat of our industry. So I was just...
Did you say the actors singing It's a Small World on the ride? Because those are animatronic figures and not real people. I'm not sure that you understood it. Yes. When we'll have to go together one day and I'll explain what's real and what's fake.
I don't want to hear your point of view on Santa Claus. I don't want to have a conversation. So we go to the next one. And this I thought was really interesting. And I share this. It's aviation, because I know you love the sector. And Michael O'Leary is an icon in his own right. He has an incredible airline, Ryanair, and he usually drops his filter. But the headline is what really took my attention. The stop rabbiting on about refunds, says Michael O'Leary. I share it for this reason. It's not about Michael. It's not about the refunds. It's not about what was happening in the interview. It's the bottom section again. O'Leary told 5 Live, we have now refunded between refunds and vouchers 1.5 billion in cash in the last 6 months. We have no customers outstanding and have requested a refund who haven't received it. Or requested. Why did I show this? Everyone is exhausted. COVID-19 has victimized absolutely everyone. And for a CEO like Michael O'Leary, he tends to lose it on stage. He loses it in interviews because it's part of his brand. Sure. This is not part of his brand. This is just part of fatigue. And this is why we've said it from the beginning, Demian, and I've always loved and respected you for this. Before this is an economic and a travel, tourism, and hospitality crisis, this is a healthcare and a humanitarian crisis. Everyone is scared. Everyone is coping, everyone is fragile, everyone is explosive. And some more than others, everyone is a grouch. But this really caused me to just step back from the point of view of, let's stop judging people and look at the context of what they're dealing with. The last industry that has 1.5 billion in cash flow is airlines, that's for sure. So, my video. Now, for the last few weeks, sir, I have respected your time limitation of 60 seconds to the point where I had a credit of 50 seconds last week, as my little video, which yes, it was airline, was 10 seconds long. The week before that, it was 30 seconds long. So technically I have 80 seconds extra, but I'm not going to take 80 seconds extra. I'm going to take 30 seconds extra. So my video, which I thought was interesting because it shows how the travel agent community, which we've spoken on Rise, is starting to pivot their explanation of their value add. Enjoy.
I'm going to go make a coffee, but I'll be back.
I love that because it demonstrated how it's not necessarily the destination people want advice on, it's the safety, security, and ability to return home that people want advice on. I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah, I think it'll be interesting to see. I think what everything we're seeing is more about purposeful travel and transformational travel that was already an issue before the crisis, and I think will grow. And so we will, from what I'm seeing, will take less frequent trips in the years following hopefully when the crisis is over, and more meaningful, bigger trips, and they'll still need more expertise for those bigger investments. So hopefully the travel agent sector is going to see something positive come out of this eventually, if they're still around.
I'm so pleased you enjoyed that video because my next one is 5 minutes in 2 weeks time.
Okay. I can make lunch during that.
Swiftly.
So enough of Anita and myself. We want to go back to you with our second poll, and then we'll bring on our two executives in residence today. So as always, this poll will be useful for us to start our conversation with our executives. So please take a moment to answer the following.
Wow.
So I'll see it's this opportunity to share my expertise. I mean, I think that's what I would have thought would be the leaders, because people have this expertise. They may not be able to work. They have something to share. We are an industry where people like to do things for other people's service. So it makes a lot of sense to me. And then I think this being your own boss, I agree, especially if it's about job security and not necessarily counting on a larger firm for those kind of consultants, because clearly some, as we'll meet later on with Nick, work for larger firms. And then this work from home flexibility, I mean, I think that was probably interesting before. I'm not sure why anybody, having done it for 6 months, would want to work from home ever again, but some people might.
Working from home is all about the commute. That's the real deal breaker. I'm intrigued, Demian, and I must say, as a consultant, I find this really interesting. And I agree 100% with the image being 0%, because sadly, the consulting category has taken on enormous abuse in the last 20 years for some good, some bad reasons. But I thought that was interesting. I think I love this. I love the spread of it. And I love the honesty of it.
And let's see what our guests have to say about this.
Excellent. And our guests, yay, so excited to share. We have two people from the consulting world. And I must say, caveat, consulting as a term is a bit like pasta. It's an entire spectrum in terms of what is out there and what the potential is and the value that can be brought in. So we've got two fantastic consultants with us. We have from the more structured corporate side, we've got Nick Mayer, who's the partner and global industry leader for tourism at PwC. Nick, delighted to have you with us.
Likewise, thank you.
Ian Douglas, who's the founder and managing partner of UK-based firm Phoenix Global. And we have a theme here. Clearly, it's not just about consulting and the world of consulting. It's about hair growth. So I'm not sure I feel qualified for that conversation, but I will leave it to you, Demian, to take the poll on the hair growth conversation.
And I thought it was a glasses conversation. I don't know what you're talking about. Let me ask you guys, before we jump into a little bit of your background, real quick, you saw the results of the poll. Let's start with you, Nick. What stood out to you from the results of that poll?
It sounded about right to me. I'm not sure about being your own boss, but that may have to do with the size of our firm. So I do have very much a boss, several, but otherwise it reflected. Again, it's a little bit painting again that nobody wants to do it for the brand. Hopefully they want to do it for the experience.
Good. And Ian, anything else speak out to you from that poll?
Yeah, I would have agreed with the first two choices. I mean, I think it is about an opportunity to share what you know. I think being one of its own boss is pretty cool as well. I worked for a big corporate for many years, so that is for me important.
Okay, so a reasonable understanding of what the benefits and situation would be like. And let me just jump in and ask you guys the following, because not everybody knows you from the audience. 30 seconds or less. Let's start with you, Ian. What kind of work do you actually do? Where's your specialization? What kind of projects do you normally, not necessarily now post COVID era, but in general?
Yeah, so I had the privilege of being in a big corporate, Kerzner International, for 20 years. Worked with Sol Kerzner, who's an extraordinary man. So my expertise is really on sort of big projects, big developments, and the work I tend to do is project management orientated and also sort of leadership and strategic advice. But I'm a one-man band essentially, but helping bigger corporates execute projects.
Okay, and Nick?
So I work, of course, in a large firm, and therefore my jobs are very often very pluridisciplinary with many different skill sets that I need to assemble and bring to my clients. And I think that's why big firms are being thought of afterwards. My clients are primarily governments, and those entities basically in charged with making tourism happen, hospitality happen in their jurisdiction. Now that can be tourism ministries, that can be giga projects, that can be destinations, and of course large or mid-sized hotel operators, but largely working with them on strategy, on implementation of their projects, and I think project management is part of all of that, or on topics around how to manage digital transformation.
Okay,
brilliant.
And I just want to make sure people that are watching remember to submit your questions using that Q&A button at the bottom of the screen. So in a few minutes, we can get some of their questions to you. Anita, I'm sure you got something you want to ask the guys.
Indeed. And I must say, because this is an interesting conversation from the point of view of, again, what it's like to be a consultant, but also what it's like to be a consultant now. And it goes to what Demian said at the opening around so many people say, I'll just go into consulting. I'll just go into consulting. And the word just starts to appear. I would love you both to please share, what is a fundamental understanding people need to know when they go from being in corporations, in businesses as employees or owners versus becoming a consultant? What is almost the head shift that needs to take place around understanding the scope of what that title means to be a consultant? Nick, from your side?
It's a really good question. I think thinking back when I did the switch, I used to be at Ritz-Carlton before that. I think what one of the biggest changes is, and you have to get comfortable with that, is that this is, whichever client you work with, it is ultimately his or her project, not yours anymore. right? And very often one of the saddest things, for example, in my profession to this day is that if I do my job right, sooner or later my job is done, and the project carries on, right, into execution or whatever it is. And I always feel very, very sad. I want to stay with them. So I think as a consultant, you have to get used to be super committed and enthusiastic and in love with your clients' projects, and I am without exception. But you need to be able to let go, and you need to also accept that sooner or later the board or the executive team says, "Thank you for advice, but it's mine, and I choose this way or that way." So that's what I find the toughest.
I always say it's like going to a doctor, and if you say, "Listen, you need to take care of yourself." "Yes, doctor, thanks very much." And then the doctor walks out and sees them eating a cheeseburger on the way out. You can't do anything about that.
No,
Ian,
you
from your
can't.
perspective?
Yeah, look, I think Nick's insight is absolutely right. I mean, I think it's firstly about being, consulting is very lumpy in my experience. It kind of comes in batches, and then you have, periods of quiet, as it were. So you've always got to be kind of available. You're the hired gun, as it were. So you've got to be there to respond and to help your clients, very quickly. But you do have to know when to move on. And I mean, as you said, if you're doing a good job, Nick's right, the sooner you move on, the better. My experience is sometimes a little different because I am often doing projects which have a finite start date and a finite sort of end date. But I think that's correct that you do want to try and make yourself redundant as quickly as possible, really.
Brilliant. Full disclosure, sorry, I knew I was going to jump in for 30 seconds. I've known Ian, and he knows where I'm going with this. I met Ian 18 years ago when I first started consulting for one of Sir Martin Searle's consulting firms, and you were on the client side for government. And you taught me, sir, the importance of dipping yourself in Teflon and never getting politically involved, especially, and I'm sure, Nick, you understand this fully, you cannot take sides. It's always like treating the two sides as divorcing parents. But I credit my consulting career and its strength to you, Mr. Douglas. So thank you for that.
He's in a very flattering mood today. No, I'm blushed, and now I can see it coming on you.
It's extraordinary. Can you see me going pink? Yeah.
That champagne must have been opened before the show instead of after the show today. Let me ask a slightly different question. I'm curious about how your work has changed pre and post COVID, or pre and during COVID. Not only the way you work, I'm sure it's more remote, et cetera, but is the kind of work that's coming in, are the needs of the people, maybe not even for you, but what you're hearing from colleagues, how are the projects changing? What kind of needs do people have now that are different from before? Ian, you want to start?
Sure. I mean, look, there's all the obvious things like Zoom, et cetera, which, I think is driving us all a little crazy. But, I'm a great one I like meeting people. I like seeing people in the flesh. And so I'm very happy to jump on a plane and go and sit with people. And I think that's often, I'm kind of old fashioned about that. I think you get the best out of people with that. But I think the other thing is, of course, that we are in a difficult position at the moment, no doubt about it. And I think certainly what, the kind of project I'm working on now, as it happens, which happens to be the one that I was working on when we started with COVID, it's really about the changing financial landscape and, navigating around new kind of requirements in terms of the debt and, and how that's provided, for the project. So it's really very, I think, practical things which are to do with where we are in this cycle.
Okay, thanks. And Nick, are you seeing a change in what people need? And again, maybe not necessarily what you're working on, but what you're hearing or is floating around in the sector?
Sure. Look, I suppose, there's many ways that you can slice and dice consulting advisory, right? You can probably cube it as well. But fundamentally, I would say there is more transactional consulting where you come in for an immediate or imminent need. This could be deals, business recovery, insolvency support, and all of these. And then you have other disciplines that by definition are long-term. So I'm a strategy consultant. By definition, with my clients, I talk about what are we going to do in 2025, in 2030, in 2035. So of course, that is also affected. But I think the work has changed very much depending on where you are. Those that are in these, I would say more short-term firefighting disciplines of consulting, I think they are very busy, but their content seems to have changed. Whereas before it was perhaps growth strategies and a second brand and third brand. Now perhaps it's more naked survival and perhaps more opportunistically also, what can I do with these opportunities are in front of me.
Sure.
Whereas, of course, the long-term ones, we are trying to guesstimate, hopefully more than guesstimate, nevertheless, how does what happens now change what we are expecting to happen in 5 years or in 10 years and 20 years? So that's how it has changed.
And what can you share about that without going into the project? How do you see today impacting the strategic plans for new developments or existing properties and projects going forward? Is this going to have long-term implications, or is this a big, huge bump that we just need to get past and then things will return largely to the way they were seen to be developing beforehand?
Well, so first of all, it's not uniform across all segments of the industry in all geographies. I think that's the first one. And I wrote this actually down because I wanted to react to this when you said, Anita, before, well, we're all going to win or we're all going to use as an industry. I'm not sure that that's true. The industry is going to survive, and travel in various forms is going to come back slower, faster, very different. But not everybody in the industry is going to be there when we come out of a slump, right? I think that's something I'm seeing. So what I'm seeing to a large extent is if one positive side effect has come of this very, very nasty situation is a lot of perhaps more classical clients that believed that things would stay analog according to the 1970s kind of operator model and what have you not, would stay on forever. They have now accepted that the transformation is here to stay, is going to be faster, and that they need to adapt to it. So whether that's digital transformation, workforce elements of sustainability, etc., many things where your clients, well, some clients perhaps always said, yeah, we'll get to it eventually. Suddenly, okay, now we got to tackle it.
Yeah,
it's interesting because before we go to questions from the backstage team that have come through our viewers, I love that you're saying that, Nick, because how long has the tourism sector been saying you have to develop domestic tourism, you have to focus on dispersion, you have to get out of tier 1 and 2 cities, and suddenly now those are the only opportunities for growth. So it's, to your point, it's forcing course correction for what we used to say we don't have time for that. How many people didn't want to deal with issues of sustainability? So it's and dare I say, because we have, as we all know, our lovely production team, aka the Wizards of Oz, who send through the questions. And I sent a text to say to them, a WhatsApp, to say, any questions so we could ask you. And I got the best typo back. And I got one back saying, we have a fee. And I thought, what do you mean you have a fee? They meant to say we have a few. So Sarah, we're going to throw it to you. Without charging us a fee, please will you throw us a question from our viewers?
Yes. So we have one from Maria, who has been a viewer of Rise from the very start, and she's actually been a guest on the show as well. And she is asking, what are your recommendations for those starting their own consulting freelance business?
Other than don't do it, what advice would you give them? Yeah, let's start with you.
Sure. Look, I think, to be honest, I got into consulting. I had this is my second kind of crack at it. My first crack at it was at a time of transition between two roles. And I went back into the corporate role through the consulting activity, actually. So I think in the second round, it was a conscious decision. It wasn't at a time of any crisis, which I think was helpful because it was something I decided I wanted to do. Primarily because I felt I had, been with this big corporation, and I didn't particularly want to go with the new owners, and I was in a very senior position. So, and I thought it's time to share what I've learned. I think the answer is that I think if you want to do it, you've got to go for it. I think it's always important in starting a new consulting industry to start with some clients. So I would certainly try and secure. If you're going, and I'm talking about the sort of individual, kind of boutique consultancy, not what Nick does. But I think if you're going into that type of consultancy, get a few clients under your belt before you start, And I think be prepared, to really work very hard initially, and probably ongoing. But I think does become a bit of a 24/7. So I think the whole way we've been working through COVID, in a way, is probably quite good preparation for consulting, because that's the way we work at the moment. People call you at 9 at night, 10 at whatever. I think that's the way of the consulting word. But probably the best advice is get some clients before you launch.
Oh, that's a good point. Nick, anything quick to add to that, or is that the main advice you'd give as well?
One only thing that I could add to this, I'm obviously not in that situation, but I have a feeling I observed that I would say smaller or individual consulting teams fare better if they work very networked with other individual consulting teams, right? So you can
very good point.
Send business to each other, exchange views, and quite frankly, I've gotten honorably beaten by some of these associations of 3 or 4 or 5 good consultants who together suddenly had very good and very powerful service offerings. So don't go at it alone entirely.
Yeah, I think it's a great point, Nick. I mean, know what you know and know what you don't know. And what you don't know, there's always generally someone in your network that can help you.
Yeah.
And that's what I've done. I've taken on some jobs where I know, whatever, 4 out of the 5 things or 2 out of the 5 things, and you work with someone on the other stuff,
Good. Sarah, another question?
Yes. Sven is asking, do you ever work with universities to help students learn how to think as consultants?
Nick, you want to take that one first, Nick?
So short answer is yes, we do. I lecture at a number of schools myself, and many of my colleagues in different disciplines also, and probably hundreds of times, right, across our global network. I'm just not sure that that consulting is such a cookie cutter profession that you can create a course to prepare them for it. I mean, there is certainly a technical element to it. Other elements come out of your classical strategy or finance or marketing courses. A huge amount of what you do is experience based. So I'm not quite sure it's quite as straightforward. I mean, if I look back, so I graduated about 22, 23 years ago. I'm not sure that much of what hopefully makes me good today has had its origin in my university schooling. Some of it, of course, but I think it's more what I've done since.
I think that's so if I can just jump in there, I think, Nick, you said something really, really important there, and it's the integrity of calling oneself a consultant. A client should never be asked to pay for a consultant to educate themselves. That the assumption is that, as you said, the expertise is brought in. So there's almost a qualification of tenure required before someone can actually say that, listen, this is where I can help.
Yeah.
So I lecture a lot, or I used to lecture a lot in Demian's class, in the strategy class usually, right? And they always say, well, do you have jobs? And I always say, no, stay in operations for 5, 6, 7, 8 years or something else, right? Don't have to do it for 30 years. You may find out you like it, but it's one of the most unsuccessful counsels that I tend to give. There seems to be a desire to immediately come into consulting. And even if you only have 1 or 2 years of operations experience, it is professionally unbelievably important, because you learn about budget cycles, about stakeholder management, about processes, policies, approval, all these things that you discovered. And again, so yeah, again, I stay with my unheeded advice to any student that is listening here. If you have the possibility, make consulting's earliest your second job, if not your third.
No, I couldn't agree more.
Thanks. Sarah, another question?
Yes. Dimitri asks, in your opinion, who suffered the most during the pandemic, asset light or asset heavy companies? Would COVID potential force a change in strategies towards hybrids?
So looking at the hotel sector, Ian, you want to start?
Yeah, I'll give you a view on this. I mean, I think what's interesting here is that I think there's going to be some very fundamental shifts, and I look forward to hearing what Nick's going to say. But I think there's going to be some very fundamental shifts in the ownership of the hospitality sector. Unfortunately, and I say that very deliberately, I think there's going to be a concentration, to the people who are sitting on cash at the moment, because the obvious question, the obvious issue is if you've got a hotel and you're leveraged and you can't make the payments, you're going to be forced into some kind of rearrangement. And I think people who are sitting on cash are going to therefore acquire, and those would likely be the private equity firms and the funds, et cetera. So in answer to your question, I think if you were asset light, I think you were a little more nimble through COVID. I think you were asset heavy. It depends who your backers were. I mean, if you've got people who prepare to ride out the storm, you're probably okay. But I think your asset base valuation is going to have been depleted significantly. Just one quick thing. I mean, Barry Sternlicht, who is one of the great, I think, financial people in the hospitality industry from Starwood Capital, was on a video conference the other day, and I heard him say he's sitting on a fund, I think it's several $1 billion, and he's expecting to acquire assets at 25 cents in the dollar, 25% of the value of what those assets were, presumably established at. That's carnage. That's hard stuff if you're the owner or the person that put that capital up to build that asset.
And the recovery time is going to be so long on those assets.
Yeah.
Brilliant. We have one last question from the backstage, please.
Binu asks, in an environment of X month of business shutdown, budgets available with clients, even as they express that I don't know how to move forward sentiment are severely restricted. How can we plan to scale up? Any thoughts?
Nick, growth?
I'm not sure that I entirely understood the question. So is this basically how can a client or can somebody from the industry plan to scale up, or a consultant?
I think it was in the industry and clients, not consultant.
Okay. Again, it depends so much where you are, right? I mean, we've actually seen a lot, as what Anita said before, if you have the blessing of being in a location that has a large domestic base, right? You would actually have been quite okay in the summer, especially if you had a double whammy with the ability of perhaps transferring some of your workforce in some of the technical unemployment schemes, right? And that's the best of both worlds. You actually had revenue, you're able to flexibilize your payroll, and all your people are fine at the end of the day, at least for the time being. If you are a super, super good operation, but nobody can get to you, right? I mean, it's really a depressing statement, but it's unfortunately true. But you can be the best operator, the best owner, the best provider of anything. If you don't have revenue coming in, then you can look at your balance sheet and you pretty much know when you're going to be insolvent. Unless, of course, you have new cash coming in, right? So I'm shying away a little bit from a generic answer, but I would say the preparation for the upswing right now that needs to be done is to give your own operation the ability to flexibilize, horrible consultant's word, but to make everything that used to be a fixed cost as flexible as possible, so that you can ramp up very quickly and ramp down, because the recovery is not going to be a smooth line up, right? So use the time wisely and pray that it ends soon, nevertheless.
Yeah, good point.
Excellent. I think sadly that's it. We have to wrap up at this point in time, but I must say to both of you, I'm really, really, really grateful. I have a question for you both, and you've got each 30 seconds to answer it. You're both consultants. You've gone through the times when they were steady. Now you've gone through the crisis. If you were to answer the question, I didn't realize X when I began consulting, what would that be? Ian.
I didn't realize how important social media was before I started consulting, I guess. Yeah, I mean, it's been the thing through COVID, I think. It's been social media. Good and bad.
But it's that networking, absolutely.
I didn't realize how many smart people there are across the industry, or how many agile people there are that really have come through and come up with cool things that in good times they never would have.
And that's the hook. It's in the good times they wouldn't have established it. Demian, I'll leave it to you to close, please.
Guys, I mean, Anita said it. Thanks so much for taking the time. And I think this was a great eye-opener for a lot of people probably out there. And whether they're going into consulting, in there, thinking about it, you've provided some valuable advice. So appreciate that. And hopefully we'll see you again in the near future in person and in better times. Thanks again.
Thanks so much.
See you very soon. Bye-bye.
Good stuff.
Fascinating.
I mean, this idea of everybody wanting to be a consultant, especially students always saying that's what they want to do and trying to, and the odd thing is some of them do get hired right away from consultancies to work. They're usually doing analysis, et cetera, and learning their way through it. So there are opportunities, but I agree. I think opening yourself up out there is important.
Indeed. Brilliant. Your concern, sir?
I didn't plan any concern. I'll be honest, as I try to always be. I think the fact that I didn't have any specific concern is my concern. It's just like, when is this going to end, right? And becoming, I noticed it outside. We have 10 times as many daily infections roughly as we did back in April. But you wouldn't know it. People are closer. Okay, there's more masks, but people are still going out. The stores are open. No one's hiding at home. And I think part of it is because kids are in school, we all just see it as a little bit less dangerous or a little bit less abnormal because kids are at school. And I think I'm concerned about that everyone's taking it a little bit lighter, even though it's worse than ever, and including hospitals are getting overwhelmed. So it's remarkable, right? We were all so concerned in March, April, and now we just seem to be kind of living with it. And I think that's what concerns me, including us.
I have to say that I have confidence in the long term. I have confidence we will get through this. We will get through it stronger. We'll get through with the vaccine. We'll get through with testing, and we'll get our masks off. But I have short-term concern, because as you and I have always said, the first round of COVID-19, Mother Nature caught us off guard. The second and third waves are because of negligence and not taking it seriously. So I'm sorry to say I agree with you.
Oh, I was hoping that would never happen. But yeah, let's hope for the best. So up next, do we want to take one quick question from the audience? Is there anything out there, Sarah, for us?
Yes, we have a question from Jennifer. In the first wave, you started RISE and told us again and again not to waste this time. With the new lockdowns, how would you advise change, and what are you both doing differently?
You start.
I think that's a great question. And Jennifer, thank you for that. The change I would encourage in lockdown 2 is that what you learned, you loved and want to continue to do, keep doing it. There was a lot of concern that people would only focus on 100 days, pick up a hobby and then let it go and get back to the real world. There's no going back, and the real world has changed profoundly. So if you're finding the language, if you're finding the skills, if you're finding it, keep doing it. Keep doing the exercise, keep doing what it takes, because that's kept you strong, and it will keep you strong long after COVID-19. What am I doing differently? I must say, I never used to spend so much time outside just walking around having chats with squirrels and geese and swans. And I love it. I love that quiet space, because this has been incredibly intense as a consultant, absorbing the shock of clients who are in a position of primal fear, because it's not just that business has been challenging, everyone's lives have been. So I found a nice eye of the storm in being able to just sit and feed a squirrel who doesn't care what I do. They don't care about talking about business. They don't want to talk politics. They just want to make sure I have peanuts in my pockets. So I'm not going to lose that habit, because that's been my peanut therapy. And you, Demian?
My answer, I think, for people is slightly different. It's if the first 100 days you said, okay, I'm gonna start something new, right? Or I'm gonna learn this language, or I'm going to learn this skill, or I'm going to build up my CV by taking a class online. I'd almost say, look at this lockdown again, just like that. Pretend the other one didn't happen. All right, you got 100 days again now. What are you gonna do with these 100 days that's different than you've done before? What new thing are you going to do? So not just continue what you've liked, which I think makes a lot of sense, but what new thing? And I think that was my concern, was we're not seeing these 100 days as important or as much of a new phase. It's kind of just blending into everything. And I would say, take a break. It's a new phase. What are you going to do with it? I'm a little, let's say, needing to get out as well, right? So, I mean, I've been exercising throughout, and I think I've got a few I'm playing more golf than I did before. I'm taking longer runs. I'm going to new places to go and run, because we can still do that, to really actually get away from home for a few hours at a time, rather than just an hour and a half run, but to get away for 3 or 4 or 5 hours. So a little bit more of that as far as I can go and see new places.
I must say, Demian, I love the advice you gave, because I think after the first lockdown, there are many people who thought, I wish I'd done X during lockdown. And now you got your chance. Right. But that's a really great point.
Okay.
Stunning.
So I think that's about all the time we've got. I think we have another slide to share with you, because we've got a interesting episode on Rise in Practice next Monday called Much to Learn You Still Have. And Star Wars fans will know that reference. And what we've got is 5 professors, not including myself, from a couple of different universities, including EHL, sharing their insights into for managers and employees about what needs to be focused on and what doesn't need to be focused on as much, given the current crisis. So how has COVID changed what needs to be taught and what needs to be learned by students and managers? So I think it'll be interesting to hear 5 different people share that.
That's great. And I must say, everyone, mark your calendars for November 23rd, because just like consulting, just like entrepreneurship, just like startups, just like leadership, this is what people have been asking. How is education going to change in a post-COVID world? So I think this is going to be really interesting. Until now and then, so we've got Rise in Practice next week, 23rd. We'll see you again live. Until then, anything you've missed, please go on to riseweekly2020@gmail.com to tell us what you want to see in the future. Our website is always there, rise-weekly.com. For any past episodes, you can actually see how much Demian's head has moved in the frame in the last 22 episodes, and watch his hair growth. And anything you want to know from us, please let us know. We are always here for you, as always. And as always, I send enormous thanks on behalf of Demian and myself to our production team, the Wizards of Oz, Jessica, Grace, and Sarah. Thank you so much to all of you. Until we see you again, stay safe, stay strong, stay hopeful, stay home if you have to and you're in lockdown, and keep your hands clean. Take good care, everyone. Over to you, Demian.
Yep. And just again, on the 16th, Rise in Practice, the education episode, and the 23rd, Anita and I will be back, and she promises to sing live for you It's a Small World. So you can have a real person doing it instead of an animatronic. So you don't want to miss that. We'll see you then. Have a good week and have a good 2 weeks. Bye-bye.
Take care, everyone.